social issues, cultural issues, of course, economic issues continued, political issues became a part of nationalist struggle. In political issues, you can understand that extremists demanded Swaraj. They were not happy with just the reforms. In economic issues continued, the economic orientation of nationalist struggle continued, but this was in the form of Swadeshi and boycott, far more aggressive than the period of moderates. Cultural issues here, Bharat Mata became the central theme of nationalist struggle during extremist phase. Nationalist painting, nationalist music, nationalist literature were used by extremists to awaken the Indians, to pull the Indians into anti-British struggle. Social issues here, the issues related to workers became an important part of nationalist struggle during extremist phase. So all these dimensions were becoming a part of nationalist struggle. That's why you see nationalist struggle was no longer just economic during extremist phase. The last dimension here, the national movement was Indianized in outlook because extremist leaders drew inspiration from Indian culture. They were Indianized in their outlook. They did not look towards the West to get inspiration and guidance. They looked towards India. Bharat Mata was the main inspiration for extremist leaders. The painting of Bharat Mata made by Abanindranath Tagore inspired the generations of extremist leaders. So these were the elements of change in the character of national movements during extremist phase. You have to understand both continuity as well as the change. Now let us have a look at the demands of extremist leaders. What were their main demand? The main demand of extremist leaders was Swaraj. Or self-rule. What was the precise meaning of Swaraj? What kind of relationship should be there with British rule during Swaraj? That was not defined elaborately. The meaning of Swaraj was defined for the first time in 1920 by Mahatma Gandhi at Nagpur session of Congress. So during extremist phase, nobody defined Swaraj, but it was broadly understood as dominion status. Dominion status means self-rule. And self-rule here means that internal affairs of India shall be under Indian control. The defense and external relations would be under British control. India would continue to remain a part of British Empire, but in internal matters, everything would be under Indian control. So that was the main demand. The demands like reforms and concessions had lost relevance, though those demands were also continuing to be raised. Simultaneous civil service examination, expansion, enlargement of legislative councils, greater association of Indians with the affairs of the state, all those things were going on, but the main demand here was Swaraj. Second important dimension here was Swadeshi. So they fought for Swadeshi, indigenous Indian education, indigenous industries, so that India could prosper, India could develop in a real manner. So Swadeshi was also an important program or agenda of extremist nationalism. What were the methods? Promotion of the use of indigenous goods, or Swadeshi was a method also to fight against British rule. The Indians were exhorted to use Indian goods or indigenous goods to bring pressure on British colonial rulers. Boycott of foreign goods, or British goods to be precise, Bahishkar. So this was Bahishkar, boycott. Swadeshi and boycott were the twin pillars of extremist struggle. Mass agitation, as was witnessed during Swadeshi movement, was a new thing here. Non-payment of taxes. B.J. Tilak was the first Indian nationalist to give a call for non-payment of taxes. Rallies and marches were organized in streets to bring pressure on British rule to accept the Indian demands. So these were the main methods of extremist struggle against British rule. What were the achievements of extremists? Achievement number one, was that level of nationalist consciousness was carried to new heights. Second, the national movement got transformed into a mass movement. So Indian national movement became a mass movement due to the efforts made by extremists. Third, the extremists brought the anti-British struggle into the streets. So national struggle was brought by extremists into the streets. It was no longer limited to conference halls and discussion chambers. Number fourth, new methods of agitation or new methods of struggle were given by extremists to the national movement. We have discussed these methods. New aims and objectives were also given by extremists to the national movement here. That is Swaraj. Then social base of national struggle was greatly widened because students, women and workers etc. started participating in anti-British struggle. Cultural base or cultural foundations of anti-British struggle were also greatly strengthened by the efforts made by extremists. The most important contribution of extremists was annulment or cancellation of partition of Bengal. Cancellation or annulment of partition of Bengal was the biggest achievement of extremists. Partition of Bengal was cancelled in 1911. East Bengal and West Bengal were brought back together. It was because of the pressure built by extremists. The British had to shift their capital, or the capital of British India was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. All these were the remarkable achievements of extremists and nationalists against British rule. What were the limitations of extremist nationalists? Limitation number one, we can see that they were extremely critical of moderates. The moderates were condemned by them as weak-knee nationalists, as beggars, as mendicants. Congress under moderates was termed by them as three-day tamasha. So this extreme criticism of moderates resulted in intense ideological division or differences. These differences were exploited by British to engineer a split at Surat in 1907. The Surat split was a big setback for national struggle. That was a limitation. They failed to appreciate the contribution or the sacrifices of moderates. Number second limitation was use of religious symbols. The use of religious symbols allowed the communal forces such as Muslim League to paint Congress, to portray Congress as Hindu organization. That was a big weakness. Number third limitation was that they shouted more. The results were relatively less. So they're making all claims of Swaraj, but nothing could be achieved in terms of Swaraj by extremists. There was no Swaraj. They did not even define what was Swaraj, what kind of relation was to maintain with Britain in Swaraj India or self-ruled India was not even explained by them. So they shouted more. The results were relatively less. So these were the limitations of extremist nationalism. Achievements were remarkable, and of course there were some limitations also. The last issue of today's class, social composition of early Congress. What was the social background? Data about social composition of Congress is available for the period from 1892 to 1909. As per this data, 13,837 delegates participated in the meetings of Congress during all these years, or in all these years. Out of these 383 were Hindus, 912 were Muslims, 210 were Parsis, and 177 were Christians. It means in early Congress there were people belonging to different religions, or Congress was characterized by the participation of Indians belonging to different religions. That's one point of data that you need to understand. The second point of data that we have for this period is that lawyers, landlords, and traders were the three most important groups. The lawyers were around 39% of total delegates, landlords were around 19% of total delegates, the traders were around 15% of total delegates during this period. Teachers, doctors, and other professionals were around 3% each. So journalists also you can see here. Teachers, doctors, and journalists were around 3% each. The remaining delegates were from different sections of Indian population. So we have this data to understand the social composition of early Congress. It means landlords were the most, the traders were the most, the lawyers were in fact having the biggest percentage in terms of number of delegates. Second dimension to understand social composition is that these leaders of Congress were urbanites, or they were urban people. Early leaders were Western educated. Most of them these early leaders were Western educated. In terms of the outlook, they were secular in character. They were well-off people. So this was the social composition of early Congress. This composition of Congress changed towards a mass-based organization with the passage of time, but that was a later phenomenon. So social composition of Congress means these points you need to write in your answer. Now let us have a look at the questions of today's class. Describe briefly the ideas and program of Indian National Congress between 1885 and 1905. So write all these. We have discussed in detail. Assess official response. The moderates were insulted, ridiculed, sidelined. They were not taken seriously by the British. So those things you need to write in second part. Some reforms were initiated. So that is positive part of the official response to the moderate politics. Describe the nature of Indian nationalism with special reference to the character of its leadership in period between 1885 and 1905. So this is going to demand only the nature and character. All the 15 dimensions of nature and character you need to write here. With an intrinsic faith in the providential nature of British rule, the moderates hoped that one day they would be recognized as partners, not subordinates in affairs of empire, and be given the rights of full British citizenship. So this is about the character, and particularly the belief of moderates in the efficacy of British rule, the belief of moderates in British sense of justice and fairness, the belief that British were here to do good to India, to develop Indians, to help Indians to live a better and prosper life. So that was illusionary, so that you have to understand in the second part critically. That was the result of the fact that moderates failed to comprehend the true colonial character of British rule. They could not see that colonialism and British rule were basically two faces of the same coin. Question 4, the economic theory put forward. Economic theory means economic critic. Put forward by moderates was trying to corrode the moral authority of colonial rule by linking Indian poverty to colonialism, and perhaps by implication challenging the whole concept of paternalistic or British benevolence. So here you have to write about the moderate politics, what was their outlook, and the main focus has to be on the economic critic by exposing the drain of wealth from India, by exposing the fact that Indian industries were being destroyed by British, by exposing that British rule was responsible for Indian poverty, hunger, and recurring famine. These moderates attacked the basic notions such as white man's burden, the British providential mission, and they successfully shattered the British benevolence. This was in turn responsible for the emergence of extremism. So that's what you need to write, economic critic put forward by moderates. Question number 5, politics remained for the bulk of moderates very much a part-time affair. Congress was not a political party but a annual 3-day show. So this comment was made by Ashwini Kumar Dutt as a criticism of the moderate politics. This was the result, or this was guided by the ideological differences between moderates and extremists. It did not represent truth. They were meeting for 3 days in a year in Congress session, but it does not mean that for the remaining part of the year, they did not pay any attention to the sufferings of Indians. They always raised their voice through newspapers, through journals, in city councils, etc. So they were true nationalists, and they did whatever best was possible. Only thing that they were the first generation nationalists. Many leaders could not see their contribution because moderates were busy in the task of laying foundations. Foundations cannot be seen by everybody. Foundations can be seen by anyone who can understand the structure holistically. Question number 6, critically examine the contributions of moderates in the formative stage of Congress. So write about the achievements or contributions here. Number 7, examine the causes and nature of extremism. So causes of rise and nature of extremist movement, both parties are right in brief, because issue would be otherwise very, very big. Question number 8, when Curzon entered the scene, the ferment of extremism had already begun to work. His policy only quickened its growth. So again, demands the same circumstances and the factors responsible for the emergence of extremism you have to write here. You have to divide your answer into 2 parts, before Curzon and with arrival of Curzon. He acted as a catalyst through his reactionary policies and through partition of Bengal. The last question here, moderates emphasized the need for political apprenticeship. Apprenticeship means training that we should keep learning under British rule. The extremists rejected the idea of England's providential nation. So write about the ideological differences between moderates and extremists. The moderates believed in British sense of justice and fairness. Moderates believed that British were good people. They wanted to do good to India. Extremists had no faith in that notion. So those points you have to emphasize here. Write all these answers in 300 words, upload a portal in your account, and I'll check your answers as always.